Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and this is another Sharks prospect update. My first one was in about mid-November, and now this is about 2.5 months later in late January. And so it seemed like the perfect time with the All-Star break to reevaluate how some of the Sharks prospects are doing in their respective leagues, whether that be juniors or professional like the AHL. So first up in the OHL is, of course, the Sharks prize prospect Ryan Merkley. He, in 43 games played, split between two teams, put up 8 goals, 42 assists, and 50 points. And there's a bit of a worry with Ryan Merkley. This isn't all positive. He had been traded from the Guelph Storm to the Peterborough Petes in about mid-December. And it seemed as though that maybe that was a move that the Guelph Storm make because they want to go for some sort of rebuild. And so they unloaded who was their at least highest scoring defenseman. But then a few weeks later, the Storm acquired Nick Suzuki, so it seemed as though they were actually making a push for the playoffs. And so most people seem to believe as though Merkley had been traded because of maybe the bad attitude issues that existed. And it's a bit, I don't know if this is a coincidence or maybe this is a reasoning, but the Guelph Storm, since having traded Merkley, have been doing rather successfully for themselves. I think they're like 11-4-2 or something, or 11-5-2. Meanwhile, the Peterborough Petes, ever since Merkley has been in their lineup, they're something like 5-8-2. And so both teams are trending in opposite directions, and Merkley is the one who is on the team that's trending in a downwards trend. And so it is a bit worrying, as well as the fact that Merkley hasn't been putting up as many points on Peterborough than he was on Guelph. Now that could be explained with that the Guelph Storm did heavily lean on Merkley, and maybe Peterborough isn't leaning on him as much, but still it is somewhat worrying. The good news here for Merkley is, of course, he's still very hyped as a prospect. He's actually having a decent plus minus. He was a +5 on Guelph, and even with Peterborough Petes struggling pretty heavily so far since Merkley's arrival to the team, he's only a -2, which at least is like half decent. So that shows that he could be improving his defensive game, and so it's not all negative for Merkley, but it is sort of a bit worrying. Next is Chmelevski, where there really aren't any worries. He's played 37 games, 12 goals, 33 assists, or 15 goals, 33 assists for 48 points. And the main draw of Chmelevski this season, because the first time I updated on him, he wasn't even a point per game. Now he is, so that's good. But his main draw is his World Junior Championship performance as the only Sharks prospect going to the World Junior Championships in around Christmas time. He performed very well. He started the tournament basically as a fourth liner for the United States. He ended it as mostly like a second liner even. He was getting power play time. He was playing with prized rookie draft sensation Jack Hughes, and he was player of the game for the United States during that gold medal match. And so Chmelevski impressed a lot of people during the World Juniors tournament, including myself, because I did really get to watch him a decent amount. And so Chmelevski is a player who's looking to have some upside here for the San Jose Sharks. Whether or not that's a top 6 upside, I'm not 100% sure on, but he does have the skill set to be able to come into, let's say, the Sharks in a bottom 6 role and possibly work his way up to a top 6 role, sort of like what Timo Meier did when he first came to the San Jose Sharks. So that's always a good thing compared to a player who would basically need to jump into the top 6 or else they're not really serviceable anywhere else. On to the QMJHL, of course, much has been said about Ivan Chekovich so far this season. In 46 games played, he has 36 goals, 44 assists for 80 points, leading the QMJHL in points. Just a word of warning, because I know a lot of people are really hyping up Chekovich, and not to just be super negative about it, but it is important to remember that Chekovich is in his draft +2 year. He's 19 going on the age of 20, so he's obviously a lot more developed than his peers he's playing with. Now, of course, it's still a good sign that the Sharks draft +2 player is leading over any of the other draft +2 players in the QMJHL this season. But just sort of like a modern example here that the Sharks have sustained, Kevin Labanc was a player in the OHL, so a more competitive league than the QMJHL, more competitive junior league at least. He led the OHL in points during his draft +2 year. It wasn't in points per game, but he was still ahead in points, which was obviously rather impressive. And yet, of course, every Sharks fan knows what Kevin Labanc's deal is. So this doesn't necessarily mean just because Chekovich is doing so well in the QMJHL that he's going to pan out to be this elite top 6 forward. It's obviously a great sign moving forward, and of course Chekovich's short stint in the AHL in his preseason game have also given some things to look up to for Sharks fans, of course, about Chekovich. But I'm just saying that his point totals in the Q do not necessarily mean that he's going to be some sort of all-star prospect. Still, obviously, a good sign, though. Next is Vladislav Kotkov. He's in his draft plus 1 year, so he's 18 going on 19. He's just recently turned 19. 46 games played for him with 21 goals, 20 assists for 41 points. So he's not a point per game, but the good news is that actually leads his team in points. And so, his team, I think it's Chicoutimi, isn't performing too well, at least offensively. They're a middling team in the QMJHL, and so Kotkov leading the way there as sort of a draft plus 1 player. Still not draft plus 2, so that's good. Could be a decent sign for the Sharks moving forward. Obviously, also not really a hyped up prospect in the Sharks system, but I guess we'll see what he can do. And him leading his team in points is nice to see. On to the WHL, where we'll find Joachim Blichfeld, another Sharks prospect that has been talked about a lot because of his 48 games played with 42 goals, 42 goals, 45 assists with 87 points. He leads the WHL in points. I believe he also leads in goals, if I'm not mistaken. But Blichfeld is age 20. He's going on age 21, I believe, during this summer. So he's a lot more advanced than some of his peers. So I wouldn't read too much into the 87 points. He wasn't even able to be a participant in the World Juniors because he is age 20. He's not under age 20. And so I wouldn't read too much into his point scoring lead, especially he does play with Cody Glass, a very hyped up Vegas Golden Knights prospect on the Portland Winterhawks. And so, Blichfeld isn't necessarily someone to have a lot of hope for. Again, it's nice to see that out of all the players who are also more developed in the WHL, it's Blichfeld who's come up on top in terms of points. But still, it's not necessarily meaning, like Chekovich, that he's going to be some sort of all-star top 6 player. I would say I would have actually a lot more faith in Chekovich than I would in Blichfeld, but not to say Blichfeld is going to be some sort of bust. Next is Noah Gregor, also doing pretty solid for himself. 44 games played, 63 points, in a similar boat as Blichfeld when it comes to, age 20 going on age 21. So again, not too much to read into it. Gregor has always sort of panned out as, I feel like, a bottom 6 player, so maybe that could still be in the cards for him. But again, not too much to read into in terms of points. Next is Jake McGrew. He has 39 games played with 19 goals, 16 assists, and 35 points. So not quite point per game. He's not really the main guy on, I think he's on Spokane. But still a decent season for McGrew, and this is his draft plus 1 year, if I'm not mistaken. On to the AHL, so a bit more of a professional league. Francis Perron has 34 games played, 13 goals, 15 assists for 28 points. Of course, the player picked up in the Erik Karlsson trade. Besides Erik Karlsson, I guess I should say, age 22, so still not too horrible, not too old. And so he could be a decent player for the Sharks in the future. He might just be a career NHLer, which is sort of the sense I'm getting, but I guess it could technically change in some way in the next year or so, but I just don't know if Perron really has it. Next is Alexander True. He's actually the point-scoring leader for the Barracuda at 38 games played, 12 goals, 22 assists for 34 points. True, on the other hand, I do actually enjoy. I feel like he's also more of a bottom 6 kind of guy, not necessarily panning out so heavily, but I feel like Wilson had signed him to an entry-level deal. I think it was early last offseason, and I was somewhat surprised because I didn't really hear much of True, but Wilson seems to know what he's doing, or at least his scouts do, and so True has panned out pretty well here in the AHL, putting up a good amount of points. Of course, I said leading the team in terms of points, and so he could be a possible bottom 6 option for the Sharks as soon as next season. A player who he will be fighting for that spot with most likely would be Dylan Gambrell. 29 games played, 9 goals, 15 assists for 24 points. Gambrell has gotten some NHL time this season, just a couple of games really, but he's been very good at the AHL level. Also a player who could easily be fighting for a bottom 6 spot, like a fourth line center come next year. True will probably be his main competition for that, but I do like both True and Gambrell, not as obviously top 6 forwards, but as potential bottom 6 forwards that could come in and be sort of like energy type of guys who could possibly chip in points-wise. Next is Jaden Helbegawat, I believe is how it's pronounced. He has 36 games played, 10 goals, 14 assists for 24 points. He was, of course, the player in the WHL the previous season, if you want to get some sort of like why not to be super excited about Blichfeld necessarily. Helbegawat, I think, had 70 goals during his last season in the WHL, and so this AHL season, it has sort of carried over a bit. 36 games played, 24 points isn't terrible, especially for an AHL rookie. So we'll see what it is moving forward. But Helbegawat is one of those players who basically is sort of like a top 6 or bust because he doesn't really have the skill set to be able to play in a bottom 6 role. So we'll see how that ends up working out. And I guess there is a bit of hope, especially since the Sharks have indeed signed him to an actual how many long-term contracts the Sharks have, it's going to be very tough for a player like him to break into the Sharks lineup. Next, in the NCAA, so this is United States sort of like colleges, John Leonard, a player not signed by the Sharks, so of course how it works in the NCAA is that these players can play in like college or whatever, and then they could sign with their team, or they can wait out and be a UFA. So we saw that happen with like Jimmy Vesey, who left Nashville for the Rangers, signed with them, or Justin Schultz, who I believe left the Ducks and ended up signing with the Oilers. So Leonard could technically do that, but he is in the Sharks system currently. 23 games played, 8 goals, 17 assists for 25 points. He was just drafted in the 2018 draft, so this is his draft plus 1 year, or I guess in college it's called his sophomore year because his previous one was his freshman year. And so Leonard's been doing pretty well. He seems to be a solid forward for his team. I'm not really sure. I'm not really knowledgeable on the NCAA, so I wouldn't be able to talk too much more about that, but it is promising offensive numbers. Onto the goaltending, we have Zachary Aymon, 18 years old, so he was just drafted recently in the 2018 draft. 19 games played with 16 wins, a 1.84 GAA and a .930 save percentage. Those lead the league, the GAA and the save percentage for the QMJHL. But of course, another caveat here that I have been bringing up, again, not to be too negative, but Aymon is on the top QMJHL team, if I'm not mistaken. They might be second place behind the team that Chekovich is on, actually. But that team is very good when it comes to the defense. I mean, Aymon, the other goaltender, he shares the net with Samuel Harvey, who I believe is the starter on that team. Aymon is sort of like the backup, also has great stats and is actually second place in both GAA and save percentage behind Aymon. So again, it's not something to read into too much, but I guess it's better that he's doing good than he is not doing good. But he might just be benefiting heavily from the fact that he is on this team that's just doing so much better than many of the other teams and is just so good defensively. If you're tired of me saying negative things, well, here comes Josef Coronar. I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Coronar. I was watching the AHL All-Star game, which he participated in, and the commentator was pronouncing it something completely different, some sort of like Czech Republic type of pronunciation. But according to the NHL, at least this is what I found online, it is pronounced Coronar. I'm not 100% sure, but anyways, he's age 20. He's a goaltender in the AHL. He's splitting the net with Antoine Bibeau for the Barracuda. 19 games played for him, 15 wins with a 2.1 GAA and a .924 save percentage. His GAA is second in the AHL behind Jordan Binnington, who some might know is playing with the St. Louis Blues at the moment. He was called up and he's been playing rather well. And his save percentage is third behind Binnington, of course, as well as Delia for the Blackhawks, a player who's, as I said, is also playing with the Blackhawks this season, has been performing at least as well as a Blackhawks goalie could be, expected to perform. And so Coronar is actually a goaltender who I do have a lot of faith in. He's been playing very, very well, especially when you compare his stats to Antoine Bibeau's stats. I think Bibeau has like a 2.59 GAA and a .913 save percentage. So Coronar is significantly better, at least statistically. And, AHL All-Star, if that really means much. And, he's been doing very, very well this season. And at age 20, you take a look at how the Sharks' goaltending situation will pan out in the next few years. Aaron Dell is signed on a 2-year deal. I think he has this year and the next one. He's also age 28 or 29 or something. Martin Jones is in the first year of a 6-year deal, but Coronar could potentially be the backup within the next couple of years once Aaron Dell's contract runs up and if they don't decide to re-sign him. And normally, most starting goaltenders break into the league at around age 23, maybe age 24. And so Coronar, by the time he's that age, Martin Jones will, be on the wrong side of 30. He'll only have like a couple years left of his contract, so Coronar could potentially be the goaltender of the future. I don't want to speak too soon, obviously, but Coronar is one of the better goaltending prospects right now in the NHL who haven't played an NHL game, so not counting someone like Carter Hart. Right after, like those KHL goaltenders for like the Islanders and the Rangers, like Sorokin and like Samsonov for the Washington Capitals. Coronar's probably, maybe close to the top 5, certainly top 10 in terms of goaltending prospects, which is certainly nice to say. And it's been a while that the Sharks have really had sort of a homegrown type of goaltender ever since, I guess, Nabokov, really, when his last season, I think, was in 09-10. Otherwise, it's been Antti Niemi, who was traded for from the Blackhawks, as well as Martin Jones, who was traded for from the Kings. So it'll be interesting if Coronar can take the net. I guess he's also not really drafted by the Sharks. He was a free agent, but it would be with the Sharks starting off. So it's still nice to say. And as I said, finally, that Coronar, he could potentially be a goaltender that the Sharks could look forward to. And so if there was someone on this board to keep an eye on besides, the obvious ones like Merkley and Shemilevsky and Chekovic? I would say Josef Kornar in the AHL. He's been performing very, very well, and we'll see how it takes him on to the next few seasons, because he'll most likely be in the AHL at least for the next season. Maybe in 2021, I believe that will be the year. He could potentially break into the NHL as the backup, as I said. But that will do it for this review. Again, I was a bit negative about some of these players because a lot has been talked about when it comes to the Sharks prospects because of the fact that they're leading the league in points in the WHL and the QMJHL, and Merkley is doing so well in the OHL in terms of defensive scoring, and Aimant is leading the goaltending in QMJHL with the stats like that. So I did have to sort of calm those aspirations because, again, the Sharks prospect pool is not that great. They've got a couple of gems and there's some potential diamond in the roughs here as well. But, there is still some hope to be had, even if I have been a bit negative in this video. And while the future maybe isn't super bright here for the Sharks, it does still have a bit of hope and a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Class dismissed.